Most people read a wagging tail as a single simple signal of happiness and stop there. But a team of researchers in Italy discovered something about tail wagging that most dog owners have never been taught to look for. Something so specific and so consistently measurable that it has reshaped how behavioral scientists think about canine emotional expression entirely. The direction your dog's tail leans while wagging, whether the wag is biased more toward the left side of their body or the right, is not a meaningless physical detail. It reflects which hemisphere of their brain is currently more active, and that, it turns out, tells you something genuinely important about what your dog is actually feeling in that moment. Welcome to Hidden Paw Signals. I want to begin the way I always do. Everything you hear on this channel comes from my own personal process of reading, studying, and trying to understand the published science behind dog behavior. I am not a veterinarian, a researcher, or a certified animal behaviorist. This is one person's learning journey through the world of canine cognition, shared with you because the findings genuinely changed how I see my own dog. It is educational content only and is not veterinary or medical advice. If you want to keep learning about what is really happening inside your dog's mind, subscribe now, because that is exactly what this channel is for. The foundational study here was conducted by Giorgio Vallortigara, a neuroscientist at the University of Trento in Italy, who has spent much of his career studying brain lateralization, the specialization of function between the left and right hemispheres of the brain across a wide range of animal species. In a study published in the journal Current Biology in 2007, Vallortigara and his colleagues observed dogs in controlled conditions while exposing them to stimuli expected to produce different emotional responses, including the presence of their owner, an unfamiliar person, a cat, and an unfamiliar, somewhat threatening dog, and carefully measured the asymmetry of their tail wagging using video analysis capable of detecting subtle differences in amplitude between the left and right side of the wag. What Giorgio Vallortigara's team found was remarkably consistent. When dogs were exposed to stimuli associated with positive, approach-oriented emotions, seeing their owner being the strongest example, their tail wagging showed a clear bias toward the right side of their body. When dogs were exposed to a stimulus associated with a more cautious or potentially negative response, the unfamiliar, dominant-looking dog in the study, their tail wagging shifted to a left-biased asymmetry. This pattern mapped directly onto what neuroscientists already understood about brain lateralization in other species, including humans, where the left hemisphere of the brain, which controls the right side of the body, is generally more associated with approach behaviors and positive emotional states, while the right hemisphere, controlling the left side of the body, is more associated with withdrawal behaviors and negative or cautious emotional states. This was a genuinely significant finding because it provided objective, physically measurable evidence for something that had previously been entirely a matter of subjective interpretation. A wagging tail had always been treated, often correctly but sometimes incorrectly, as evidence of a happy dog. Vallortigara's research demonstrated that the wagging itself contains more granular information encoded in its directional bias that reflects the underlying neurological and emotional state generating it, rather than functioning as a single, undifferentiated signal of generic positive arousal. What makes this research even more compelling is a follow-up study, published several years later, that tested whether other dogs could actually perceive and respond to this directional asymmetry, which would be necessary for the signal to function as genuine communication rather than simply being an interesting but socially irrelevant byproduct of brain lateralization. In this follow-up work, researchers showed dogs video footage of other dogs wagging their tails with the asymmetry digitally controlled, left-biased in some clips and right-biased in others, while monitoring the heart rate and behavioral response of the dogs watching. The dogs watching the left-biased, more negative-associated wag showed elevated heart rates and more anxious behavioral indicators, while those watching the right-biased wag remained calmer. This demonstrated that the directional asymmetry is not just a passive readout of internal state. It functions as a genuine, perceivable signal that other dogs actively read and respond to. Before we continue, an important pause. As always, what I share here reflects my own personal reading of the published research and is offered for education only. It is not veterinary or behavioral advice. Tail wagging direction is a subtle signal that requires careful, controlled observation to assess reliably, and it should never be used as the sole basis for judging whether it is safe to approach an unfamiliar dog. If you are ever uncertain about a dog's behavior or intentions, particularly with an unfamiliar animal, please err on the side of caution and consult a professional. And always speak to your veterinarian about any concerning behavioral changes in your own dog. There is an important practical caveat that the original researchers themselves emphasized.
The asymmetry Vallortigara's team documented is genuinely subtle, often difficult for the untrained human eye to detect reliably in real time without video analysis tools. This is not a replacement for understanding overall body language, ear position, body tension, and the broader context of a tail wag, all of which remain essential for accurately reading a dog's emotional state. The lateralization research adds a layer of scientific depth to our understanding of tail communication. It does not replace the more holistic, whole-body reading that remains the most reliable approach for everyday interpretation. This research connects to a much broader body of work on brain lateralization across the animal kingdom, a field Giorgio Vallortigara has contributed to extensively beyond dogs alone, including studies in birds, fish, and other mammals. The general pattern, left hemisphere associated with approach and positive engagement, right hemisphere associated with withdrawal and vigilance, appears to be a deeply conserved feature of vertebrate brain organization, suggesting that the basic neurological architecture underlying emotional expression in dogs may share ancient evolutionary roots with patterns found across a remarkably wide range of species, including our own. What I find genuinely fascinating about this line of research, in my own process of working through it, is how it reveals layers of communication happening within a behavior so common that most owners have stopped consciously noticing it at all. A wagging tail seems like the most basic, unambiguous signal in the entire vocabulary of dog body language. The Vallortigara research shows that even this seemingly simple signal carries an embedded layer of neurological information, detectable to other dogs, and now, with the right tools, detectable to us as well. It is a reminder that the better we understand the science, the more complexity we find hiding inside behaviors we long ago assumed we had already fully figured out. There is a final dimension worth considering about why this matters for everyday life with a dog. Most owners default to treating any wag as uniformly positive, which can occasionally lead to misreading a dog's actual comfort level in a given interaction, particularly in moments of social uncertainty, such as meeting a new person or another dog. While the precise left-right asymmetry is difficult to assess without specialized tools, understanding that tail wagging is not a single uniform signal, but a behavior capable of encoding genuinely different emotional states, depending on subtle variation, encourages a more careful, attentive approach to reading your dog overall, paying attention not just to whether the tail is moving, but to its height, speed, stiffness,
and the broader context of the interaction it is occurring within. As I always want to close with, everything shared here is part of my own learning process and is offered for education and reflection only. It is not professional veterinary or behavioral advice. If you have any concern about your dog's health or behavior, please consult a qualified local veterinarian who knows your individual dog. No video can replace that relationship. What I take from all of this, in the end, is a small but meaningful lesson about humility in observation. A behavior as familiar as a wagging tail turned out to be hiding a layer of neurological complexity that took careful, controlled scientific measurement to uncover. Complexity that no amount of casual, everyday observation, however attentive, would likely have revealed on its own. It is a useful reminder that even the most ordinary, constantly repeated behaviors in our dogs may still have more to teach us if we are willing to look closely enough and ask the right questions about what is really happening underneath them. There is a final dimension worth considering about why this matters for everyday life with a dog. Most owners default to treating any wag as uniformly positive, which can occasionally lead to misreading a dog's actual comfort level in a given interaction, particularly in moments of social uncertainty, such as meeting a new person or another dog. While the precise left-right asymmetry is difficult to assess without specialized tools, understanding that tail wagging is not a single uniform signal, but a behavior capable of encoding genuinely different emotional states, depending on subtle variation, encourages a more careful, attentive approach to reading your dog overall, paying attention not just to whether the tail is moving, but to its height, speed, stiffness, and the broader context of the interaction it is occurring within. As I always want to close with, everything shared here is part of my own learning process and is offered for education and reflection only. It is not professional veterinary or behavioral advice. If you have any concern about your dog's health or behavior, please consult a qualified local veterinarian who knows your individual dog. No video can replace that relationship. What I take from all of this, in the end, is a small but meaningful lesson about humility in observation. A behavior as familiar as a wagging tail turned out to be hiding a layer of neurological complexity that took careful, controlled scientific measurement to uncover. Complexity that no amount of casual, everyday observation, however attentive, would likely have revealed on its own. It is a useful reminder that even the most ordinary, constantly repeated behaviors in our dogs may still have more to teach us if we are willing to look closely enough and ask the right questions about what is really happening underneath them. There is also a useful evolutionary question this research raises, one that Vallortigara and colleagues have explored in subsequent comparative work. Why would brain lateralization and its outward expression through asymmetric movement persist as a visible signal at all, rather than remaining a purely internal neurological feature with no outward behavioral expression? The leading explanation within this field is that once a lateralized internal state begins producing a consistent, visible external asymmetry, even one originally without any communicative function, other individuals capable of detecting that asymmetry gain a real advantage in predicting the internal state and likely subsequent behavior of those around them. Over evolutionary time, this can transform an incidental physical byproduct of brain organization into a genuine, actively used social signal, precisely the trajectory the follow-up research on dogs perceiving and responding to tail asymmetry appears to support. It is also worth noting how unusual it is within behavioral science more broadly to find this degree of alignment between a measurable internal neurological state and a directly observable external behavior in a non-human species. Much of what researchers infer about animal emotion relies on indirect behavioral proxies alongside physiological measures like heart rate or cortisol that require specialized equipment and direct contact to assess. Tail wag asymmetry is unusual in offering a potentially visible external signal that may reasonably directly correspond to underlying hemispheric brain activity, which is part of why this research has remained so influential and frequently cited within the broader field of canine cognition and emotion research since its original publication. If this changed how closely you will watch your dog's tail next time, share it with someone who has ever assumed any wag automatically meant a happy, approachable dog. Leave a comment below. Have you ever noticed your dog's tail wag differently in different situations? I want to hear about it. Subscribe if you have not already, and I'll see you on the next Hidden Paw Signals. The voice and visuals in this video were created using artificial intelligence. Thank you for watching Hidden Paw Signals.